It's time now for Korea Book Club, our weekly segment where we delve into the world of Korean literature and books through works in translation and beyond. This week it is our special monthly edition of the club where we introduce more recent bestsellers or notable works in Korea that have not yet been translated to get a better sense of the local literary scene today. And for that we have a new contributor joining our show. I'm delighted to welcome book reviewer Colin Marshall to the show. Colin, hello and welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Seeing as it's your first time on the show, can you briefly tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, I suppose we're here in Korea, so the most relevant fact is I'm American. I'm not Korean. I moved here 8 years ago. I moved here from Los Angeles' Koreatown, in fact. So I got a little bit of grounding in Korean culture before I came. But you could say I'm a cultural essayist. I write about books, of course, but also film. I write about cities, all kinds of things. But I have a book coming out in Korean this month called 한국 요약 금지. And I do a podcast as well in Korean called Kolin의 한국, or Colin's Korea, you could say.
Right, so it's very impressive that you are doing all this work in Korean, especially your podcast and a book coming out, 한국 요약 금지. How do we translate that?
Oh boy, that's not an easy one, is it? I mean, don't summarize Korea? It's forbidden to summarize Korea? I don't know. Do you have any better ideas than that?
I wasn't sure, but it's essentially, I think you're trying to say that Korea's too complex to be summarized easily. Is that?
I hope so. I mean, that was a title suggested by the publisher. So I wrote the essays for them, and they came up with the title because as a foreigner, I don't know if I have a great sense of Korean titles and what a book needs to sell in the Korean market, but they do. So I left it up to them. And I like the title, actually. It's because I never would have been able to think of it myself. But, don't summarize Korea, because so much writing about Korea by foreigners or oftentimes by Koreans is just too, Korea is this, Korea is that, Korea is the country of this or that, or this is why Korea is great, this is why Korea is bad. There's just too much of that. And I think the publisher liked that I don't do that.
Well, we're delighted to have you on board. I'm very curious about what you will be introducing us to this segment in the months to come.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. What book have you brought in for us today?
Well, it's a quick, entertaining read. It's a new novel by a very prolific writer, Chung Myung-seop, and it's got a title that I doubt anyone could hear without being at least a little bit intrigued. 뱀파이어 Sherlock, or, as it also says in English on the cover, Vampire Sherlock.
Okay, so that's Sherlock, as in Sherlock Holmes, right?
The very same. Nearly a century and a half after Arthur Conan Doyle created him, Sherlock Holmes undoubtedly remains the most famous fictional detective in the whole world, even if you just hear his first name. I mean, his image comes so vividly to mind, with the pipe and the deerstalker hat and the tweed cape and everything. But that's not quite the way he looks in this book, not the way he's described.
Okay.
Here, he takes the form of an English teacher, an everyday foreign English teacher in a shindoshi, or new town, called Yurim, fictional place. But it's a real role, that of the English teacher.
An English teacher
Yes.
here in present-day Korea. Okay, you're
That's
right.
right.
I am very intrigued. So the book is a Sherlock Holmes story, but one that takes place here in Korea.
Here in modern-day Korea, if you can believe that. Half the interest of 뱀파이어 Sherlock is seeing just how the author manages to transport Sherlock Holmes from Victorian London to a modern-day Korean suburb. And in fact, he also brings here a real-life figure from 19th century England, not a fictional character, the real-life Jack the Ripper, the serial killer, whose crimes remain unsolved still today. And even though Jack the Ripper was making headlines in the very same period the first Sherlock Holmes stories were published, Arthur Conan Doyle never actually had his creation encounter Jack the Ripper or any character like him. But that's actually inspired generations of fans, or Sherlockians as they call themselves, to write their own Sherlock Holmes stories with Jack the Ripper as the villain.
Right, so I take it that Chung Myung-seop, the writer, is a Sherlockian himself.
Oh, very much so. His business card has a silhouette of Sherlock, instantly recognizable, right there on it. And a few years ago, he actually co-wrote a book with a law scholar, Yoo Jae-sol, examining in detail all the forensic science involved in the original Sherlock Holmes stories. Now, 뱀파이어 Sherlock is a much less weighty book, as you can imagine, but it's no less grounded in familiarity with Arthur Conan Doyle's work. And it has these protagonists, a couple of high school girls named Sehi and Hyeri, who are Sherlockians themselves. And they're plunged into a mystery of their own, and they make frequent references to the details of Sherlock Holmes' cases from stories and novels like A Scandal in Bohemia or The Hound of the Baskervilles. And each time they do, the author provides an explanatory footnote to help readers unfamiliar with the Sherlock Holmes canon understand the context, and no doubt to make some of them want to go seek out the originals themselves.
Wow, so we can see a real affection for the original Sherlock Holmes stories by the author then, especially I think in Korea, although everyone's familiar with the character, they might not have read the book themselves. I think a lot of people, they might have seen some of the films or the TV series, but yes, the books themselves might not be familiar, so I think that would be very helpful for Korean readers and to pique their interest as well. But the thing is, I'm sure all our listeners are wondering at the moment, where does the vampire come in?
Yes, well, get ready for this. Sherlock is the vampire. Or rather, he's one of the vampires. Jack the Ripper is the other one. And the novel opens in the London of 1888, the year of Jack the Ripper's killing spree. And in it, Sherlock Holmes nearly corners Jack the Ripper. But Jack the Ripper manages to bite him and escape. So as Chung Myung-seop imagines it, Jack the Ripper was a vampire. And since vampires have to drink blood to live, it would provide some motivation for the murders he committed. But, as we all know, if you get bitten by a vampire, you turn into a vampire yourself, which is what happens to Sherlock, and explains how he survives into the 2020s, since vampires are immortal.
Okay, so both Sherlock and Jack the Ripper are vampires.
Both vampires, and both here in Korea.
Both, yeah, it's quite the twist, quite a crossing of the streams in genres.
Indeed.
Just thinking about that. But then, as you said, not only that, they're here in Korea. What are they doing here in Korea, posing, with Sherlock as an English teacher?
Well, given that they can live forever, it makes sense that vampires would have to keep moving from place to place in order to avoid detection. They don't age. And when that vampire is also a figure as well known as Sherlock Holmes, he really has to stay on the go so as not to be recognized. As Chung Myung-seop tells the story, Sherlock Holmes' pursuit of Jack the Ripper has continued for more than 130 years, over various countries, on different continents, and it's here in Korea that he stages their ultimate showdown.
Okay, and my questions keep coming. So Jack the Ripper has been living in Korea too?
You could say he's been hiding in plain sight. In 뱀파이어 Sherlock, he runs one of those essential institutions of modern Korean life, or at least essential to my own modern Korean life, a coffee shop. And he gets involved in a rivalry with another cafe called Moonchild, which is known as the best in Yurim, this Shindoshi, where everything takes place. And he sends his girlfriend to a roasting class held there in order to learn its secrets. That girlfriend turns out to be Hyeri's cousin, and her involvement in a hit-and-run incident is what eventually entangles Hyeri and Seihi in the saga of Jack the Ripper and Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, but surely you'd think people would sense that something was up if Jack the Ripper were running their local coffee shop.
You would think so. But we have an explanation for that. There are two kinds of vampires. Those who kill humans to drink human blood, like Jack the Ripper does, and those who rely on other sources, like Sherlock Holmes does. Now, it seems that the former come to physically resemble their victims over time, so that after decades of wandering across Asia, Jack the Ripper doesn't really stand out in Korea. And the author obviously knows a lot about vampirism, but also about coffee. And having worked for years as a barista before turning full-time writer, he gets the chance in the book to incorporate what's presumably only a small fraction of his knowledge on the subject.
Well, it seems the author sounds like a man of many interests indeed.
His work certainly reflects that. The last book of his I read was called 한국인의 맛. It was a hybrid of fiction and non-fiction about foreign foods that were Koreanized in the 20th century, like jjajangmyeon or danpatang or gimbap even. But he writes or contributes to several books each year, and those of us who write professionally, as I do, have to envy his sheer productivity, to say nothing of his imagination. He's published in a host of different genres, from mystery to historical fiction to zombie apocalypse to books for young readers. The list goes on and on.
So he's very prolific, but also very imaginative as well. It wouldn't occur to just any novelist to bring Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper to Korea, let alone make them vampires.
Well, nor could many novelists do it with such an evident sense of fun, and in prose so clear that it's an easy read, even if Korean is your second language, as it is mine. But, what I enjoy most about following a writer like Chung Myung-seop is the surprise of seeing just what direction he goes with each new book. I couldn't possibly guess what the subject his next one will be, but I can assure you he's writing it even as we speak.
It almost sounds like it could be a sort of a fan fiction novel for Sherlock Holmes, but perhaps of a higher caliber, considering the reputation of the writer?
Professional fan fiction, perhaps, and at the very end he teases, I don't want to give too much away, but he teases there may be a sequel to Vampire Sherlock, and it may involve werewolves.
Okay, wow, okay, so there could be more coming. I wonder, do you think this is a work that could cross over and get an English translation as well? It certainly has a lot of elements that I think would appeal to Western readers. Even the title alone, I think, would cause people to double take and look twice.
There are many readers in America I know who would just, if they know vampires, they know Sherlock, You know, they're interested right away. And though set in Korea, for the most part, this book is not so deeply rooted in Korean history or culture, like some of his other books, that it's not universal. I think everything, not just the language would translate, but metaphorically speaking, everything about the book would translate well to other cultures. Wherever there are genre readers, wherever people know Sherlock Holmes or vampires, I think there'd be an interest.
Sure, well, hopefully it can pique the interest of some translators and some publishers in the West as well. We'll see if it does get picked up. Well, we'll leave it there for this week's Korea Book Club. It was quite the pick for your first one with us, Colin. Once again, it was called Vampire Sherlock by Chung Myung-seop. Thank you for that recommendation, and we'll catch up with you again next month.
Thank you very much. Look forward to it.